Welcome to Conversations in Mind. This is a space for conscious inquiry, where metaphysics, new thought, and the science of mind meet real life. In a world calling for deeper awareness, we explore the nature of consciousness, the power of thought, and the presence of spirit moving through everyday experience. And now, here are your hosts, Barb Bue and Mark Gilbert.
Welcome to Tuesday afternoon and Conversations in Mind. So here's a question. What if your mind is more than just a collection of thoughts? What if it's actually the gateway to a whole new way of living and being? So I want to welcome you to Conversations in Mind. I'm Reverend Barbara, and I'm joined by my dear friend and fellow minister, Reverend Mark Gilbert. We are here to attempt to demystify the study of new thought and dive deep into the science and soul of consciousness. So whether you're a longtime seeker or just curious about the power of your own perspective, let's get into the mind. Let's have some good conversation, and welcome to the show. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Barb. It's good to be back with you this week.
Good to be with you, my dear. Always good to be with you. So we decided to tackle this idea of the future of spiritual community. And I know that because of our previous experiences working for Centers for Spiritual Living headquarters and being in church ministry, local church ministry, center ministry, that we probably have, okay, I'll speak for myself. I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about this.
I do too.
And I figured as much because you brought this subject to the table. So I was like, oh, he's got some thoughts.
Yeah. You know, and there's a little danger in playing the role of futurist here.
Oh, come on.
It was funny.
Here's my crystal ball of all things.
I was reading a magazine this past week, and it was like a magazine from like 2005 or something.
Oh,
it was like futurist predictions, and I was reading through them and going, "Well, they got that one wrong, and they sort of got that one. They got that one wrong, you know." So here we go.
Like go back and watching a movie from before cell phones, right? Like
right.
When everybody's running to a phone booth or answering the phone on the desk, and you're like, "What is this?" You know, young people now would be like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are some trends and some. So I did pull up some statistics outside of New Thought because I thought it'd be interesting to just sort of throw that into the mix. Like, where are we in? And this is very U.S. centric. So, so the latest information that I could find about church attendance in the United States is that only 30% of Americans are attending church regularly, and like 40% are attending once a month, but only 30% are really doing more than that. 55 to 57% of Americans never attend religious services any longer, which is a long-term trend to secularization, which I could go into a whole history and the comparison of Europe and 40 years ago and 50 years ago. And I think COVID sped us up about 10, 15 years and all of that, but it's kind of been following. The interesting thing, and this will lend itself to our conversation about New Thought, is that 39% of millennials are attending. So there's a higher in that. I looked it up. I had to look it up because I never keep these straight. 30 to 45 age range, and Gen Z is actually attending a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
They are, however, not attending conservative, heavily dogmaed and Christian churches.
Mm-hmm. Does your stats show what they might be attending?
No, because this is kind of a Christian website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And interestingly, it seems that there's this sort of historic reversal in that men are starting to attend church as much as women, or even a little bit more. They're in that 31 to 32% range, women 31% range, which in the past has not been the case, but
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think reflects some of what I think about church itself, which is I think sometimes driven by loneliness and disenfranchisement and wanting to be in community. And so I think part of the decline in those more conservative Christian realms is disenfranchisement, because people don't want to disenfranchise their friends who happen to not be heterosexual and all those other things.
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done right now in the area of men's work, specifically in addressing the fact that a lot of men feel disenfranchised right now, that they feel like the system doesn't favor them as much as it used to, and they're sort of lost and wandering, and perhaps that whole sense of like feeling like you're untethered brings you to some religion, and maybe that might be even more traditional religion for people who are maybe sliding down the scale of feeling self-sufficient, looking for some sort of support, and they look out at the world and they say, well, the only church I know is these traditional Christian churches. It's just a conjecture.
Who will define what a man is for me? And yeah. Oh, that's a whole other show.
Yeah, it is.
I'm hearing a whole other show, which would be interesting, because being not a man, but being a very huge observer and a person who attracted a lot of men into my community, and I'm still in touch with those guys. That would be an interesting show. But
so what do these stats tell you, Barb, as you were going through them? Did you come to any conclusions?
Well, I mean, the one conclusion is, we've experienced this in New Thought too, this decline in attendance, particularly during and immediately post COVID. Now, in this, it said that some of that has leveled back into those averages, and I think that's happening in New Thought as well, but for different reasons. But what it tells me is that much like Europe, we are not driven by religion any longer. We do have a subset of the population that's very driven by religion, and okay, fine, but we're also in need of having greater conversation, I think, about those divides between religious and non-religious. Which is a place I think New Thought played for a really long time, but we've moved away, I think, from being a bridge to Christianity in many ways. Some of our communities still are, and some of our ministers still are, but like I myself, like not a bridge from Christianity so much anymore. And I think unity fills that role a little more than we do, and the Unitarians seem to be growing in leaps and bounds, at least in my local community. But the Unitarians are very focused on social justice issues and on welcoming and being open and really having programming around that and messaging around that.
Yeah. From my lens, and I tend to look at things a lot through spiral dynamics lens, which we've talked about in previous shows. But there is sort of a movement or an evolution of people in their worldviews where they go from being attracted to a traditional fundamentalist kind of religion to moving into being very secular and no religion. And when they recognize the limitations of a secular world that doesn't give them meaning, and they come back to looking at something that might be faith-based, it's not the old religion that they previously maybe perhaps grew through, but it's to finding something new. And I think that's the growing spiritual but not religious group. In spiral dynamics, we're talking about moving from the blue to the orange to the green memes. But what it is moving to a postmodern perspective that sees the intersection and unity of everything and looks for a faith that brings that together, that tries to meld science and spirituality together. And I think that a lot of people who are in this seeking stage don't necessarily feel drawn to a spiritual community. Oftentimes they feel like they can do it on their own, or they go out in the marketplace of spiritual ideas, which, you and I well know, you can go online and find just about anything and something online to support you. And they may make that their community. So when they say they don't go to church, that may not mean that they don't, participate in online seminars or go to drum circles or anything that feeds their spiritual side. They're just not going to what they would consider quote unquote traditional church. And I think that speaks to maybe the evolution of, in my mind, of New Thought centers and where they may be going. Is that I know that when I came into New Thought centers, it was very much the traditional church service, that was prayer and music and a talk and music and a prayer, so it went through sort of a little hour-long show.
Service.
Yeah, and boy, you better not be the minister trying to change that either.
Right. Yes. Or maybe it's time.
Yes, and that's the point.
That's the point here. Like, maybe it's time. One of the notes in this research I was doing about younger folks then, which led me to what's a millennial, and to define that age range, because I can never remember them, was this definition that included that this is a group of people who are more interested in experiences than the acquisition of stuff.
Yeah.
And in the case of Gen, right behind them, Gen Z, those are kids that have been through 2 recessions in their life already. So they're way more about experience and connection and than they are in the acquisition of stuff. So so and you're right. There's a million things on YouTube every day, and programs and people and teachers and psychics and all those things, and most of them have the same message. I went to a symphony thing of college students last night, and the young man who was conducting was talking about being connected to something larger yourself, but not being religious, and that this music reflected that. And he was talking about Beethoven. Like, I mean, we're everywhere.
Yeah. It's coming back to spiral dynamics for a minute. That movement from the modern to the postmodern perspective also includes a recognition not only that maybe science doesn't answer all the questions of deep meaning that I have, but also that the materialistic gathering of possessions isn't satisfying me. There's an aspect of that. So when we move to higher perspectives of or growth in that psychological area of our lives, we tend to look at it and say, well, I don't need stuff anymore. I need experiences. I need to experience the fullness of this life and what it looks like. So that brings us, to what does a spiritual community look like, and as we move forward into the future, as we look to meet the needs of that growing population who is letting go of the old religion, moving through materialism, and then moving to a state of how can I bring a spiritual nature to my life that speaks to where I'm going, and I think one of the, I can boil this down to some simple things. One is there's a spiritual education component that I think that the centers can provide. Mm-hmm. There's also, and probably there is a social action, bringing folks together in a degree of social action. And there's also the sense of community. That I think the one thing that you can do that you can't do online successfully, in my opinion, is to truly develop that total sense of community. You can develop it to a degree, but there's nothing like being in the company. And I'm going to get woo-woo on you for a moment, but it's going to be in that moment where we're in the same room and we're sharing our energetic fields with one another. Yes. And there is a part of you that connects with people on a different level than what you can do online. And people who have that experience recognize it. And when they don't have that experience, they know that it's lacking in their lives. So I think one of the things that spiritual communities need to do is to bring a way for people to come together in community. And the question is not to be is how do we do that in a way that feeds that community need? And so so from key concepts, learning and growing, mm-hmm. There is building community, taking our moral actions that we're growing through and bringing them into social actions in the world. And I think the final one is a sense of having a direct experience of the divine, that we create a sense of tasting and growing into higher levels of consciousness. So there's sort of an inner growth piece where we're growing through experiential stuff. to higher levels of understanding who we are and sensing oneness. There is through that of doing it with other people so that we have an inner subjective experience with other people. We're building, it's going from not only being me to being we, like we've talked about in so many weeks, and that we sense of building that inner subjective community takes us out in our local communities or the world at large to be of service to the greater planet. So there's an inner growth personally. There is also our expression in the outward world of our individual aspects of being and how we show up in the world. And then there's the collective inner subjective role in the outer expression in the world in service. And I think if we can, and those of you who are familiar with Ken Wilber's work, that's probably all 4 quadrants in his quadrant models, is the inner and the outer and the individual and the collective. And I think sometimes too many of our communities maybe rely too heavily. There's a lot of people who want to put all their emphasis on social action. Social action is good, but we've also got to address the need for people to have that inner growth. And we also need to have people have that experience of interactions with fellow people that I think is so important.
Well, I think that's where our classes have been key in developing community and developing connection, where people are sitting in a room together and actually sharing, doing usually some pretty heartfelt sharing within a couple of weeks of being together and learn and developing some trust. And I think that while Zoom is a really amazing tool, it does not provide that energetic transfer. In fact, our bodies, I learned about Zoom fatigue at some point along the way, because our bodies are putting out that energy looking for something back because we see a person on the screen. So our body starts to react like that energetically, but then we get nothing back. And that's where Zoom fatigue really comes into play. And I think probably that has a different, I haven't taught an online class in a long time. So, the last time I taught an online class was still during COVID, and we were just sorting through it, right, for the most part. And I was teaching ministerial classes, which is different. So, and ethics, which is way different than having the heartfelt of spiritual practice. So I think that it's time for change in many like I have said many times now to whoever felt like listening, that if I was going to go back into into church ministry in a regular way, that I would not do it the same way anymore. I don't, like, I would completely blow up the whole order of service thing and start over. I don't feel like very many people want to just sit and listen to someone talk for 25 minutes. They might want to listen to someone talk for 10 minutes, but then share or ask questions or I don't know. In my vision, spiritual community now would be like, if I was going to do it in an hour a week, right, it would be a 20 minute meditation, a 10-minute talk, time for coffee and donuts and conversation and real conversation with people. I don't know if it would work, if that would grow community or not. I think it would develop what I would call a beloved community of people who were there to care for one another. And I think as we're all aging, and as a lot of people are, I think there is a call for that, for a community which takes care of each other,
Right.
And the part of what used to be church a long time ago, which was people brought you soup if you were sick, right? And there's still an enormous value in that becomes missing in our lives because there's no other place to fill that I'm aware of outside of a spiritual community. So I think there's a ton of potential if in a willingness to expand and change and maybe do it differently. And I'm sure that there are many spiritual communities in New Thought who are doing really great, doing the same formula that they've always done.
Yeah.
I do think, however, our focus on the gaining of material things is becoming, I don't know, the word that comes to mind is sour in a way. Like, it had its time, And now it is an idea of abundance that is much bigger than Princess Palaces. We talked about this a little bit a couple
Right.
weeks ago, than the attraction of material gain. But it is about stewardship of one another and community and the planet.
Yeah, interestingly, I've been putting together a material for a class I'm doing for one of our spiritual CSL communities coming up later this month, and it's all around the Ernest Holmes at Asilomar book that I helped compile a few years ago. But one of the quotes I pulled from the book to use in that was Holmes was basically saying that one of the directions and where we're going, and I'm paraphrasing him in the moment, but it's that we're less about physical healing and gaining material possessions than we are in about developing the relationship with God and the divine.
Yes.
And that our true role is in that. That's where our major emphasis should be. You said the other is important. Yeah, and I think you understood that from a standpoint that we had to have a certain degree of feeling security, through our possessions and material things that we have, to even beyond that path of seeking a relationship with God. But that our true role in the science of mind was to develop that relationship, to develop it. So I hear what you're saying, and I would probably, if I were going back in a center, I've thought about this myself. It's like, well, how would I do Sunday? And it would be very much different. I would probably break it up into smaller things, smaller chunks based on where people's interests were. I would have an emphasis on spiritual practices where you've got devoted things that are for that and encourage attendance. I would also have our community building things where it would be short talks around some area so that we can feed the spiritual intelligence of the person regarding our philosophy, so that we have sort of a let's at least give you some information about what we're teaching and how we approach the world. But then let's put people in small groups and have them communicate with one another. In fact, I think small group work is probably one of the key points for much of our development. I know that there was a minister in our movement many years ago that tried this in some degree, and I think had some success with it, of a whole building this sort of cascading thing where there was a inner group of people who were the facilitators of groups, and then they cascaded out to smaller groups and smaller groups, so that the message was consistent and the direction was consistent from that leaders of the community, but that they also were developing the relationships between consistent groups who met together over time. I know that when I have,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that I know that when I've taught online the last few years, I've taught two models of classes. One was a year-long practitioner training class for CSL, which I did for several years. And I noticed that over time and the intimate sharing, that it did build a degree of community, so that when people were they were from all over the U.S. and even outside the U.S., but when they traveled to where somebody else was, they wanted to go visit them. They wanted to connect with them personally. Mm-hmm. And so there is a way over long online classes to develop that kind of community. But on the other hand, I've taught ministerial classes too, where you're in for a couple of weekends, and it's hit and go, and it's hard to develop that sense of community in a very quick online class. The irony is that we also know from feedback that people like shorter classes and not the longer classes.
Nobody's signing up for a year.
Right, nobody's signing up for a year.
Right, even if you looked at the population in New Thought churches and the number of people that then sign up for that practitioner training, which is the one thing, it is a very small percentage of people, and mostly even 6 to 8 week. I mean, we were told very clearly 8 to 10 week classes too long.
You're right.
In the statistics I was sharing with you, people are there's a 10% difference in church attendance between regular and once a month. So, there's our lives, people's lives are really full. And and especially people with children, school sports happen on Sundays now. Sports are, all these things are piled on, and what was really simple 20 years ago is not simple anymore.
Yeah, I think we need to make a distinction here between an educational burst of information should be in a short, kind of concise class. That will address people's needs to not sign up for something overly long. But let's make a distinction between that and the sense of building the connection and community with like-minded people. I know that my wife Mary is been in a multi-year sort of ongoing discussion group. I've got a men's group that I get together with monthly that's been going on for many years. And these are important aspects of our lives, is to have an ongoing community building connection piece. And I think that the spiritual communities of the future really need to tap into this fact that we have a need to connect with other people at a deep, deep level on an ongoing basis. But how do we as a community facilitate that? I think a lot of communities build these maybe 10 weeks to get together, kind of thing, and then it's over. But I think somehow or another, we need to look at people's needs. And there could be people who come in on a Sunday and they don't want to be part of a long ongoing group. And we have to be very flexible. We got to be able to build to the need of people who want to do quick hits and come in and leave and be there every once in a while. But we've also got to meet the needs of people who want a long-term commitment to having a spiritual community with heart-minded connection.
So, one of the questions that's constantly in the bubble of New Thought, particularly CSL these days, is how do we attract younger people? But as we were talking about this, and I've thought about this a lot, the evolution that happens in many people's lives from fundamentalism, Protestant, whatever it is we grew up with, right? Mm-hmm. Through the area of not having anything to I'm missing something, doesn't always happen until we're well past our 20s, 30s, and maybe even 40s. And so I have wondered that, is the fact that our communities are primarily older, is that just a fact? Is that just a part of who we are? Because, and not to take anything away from younger people who are way ahead of most of us, and I think that we're not doing a good job of meeting them where they are.
Yeah.
Because they're ahead of where we were at 40. So, and they're incredibly busy. And it takes, I don't know, not everyone understands that they have a need for long-term community or long time thing. Although, and now this is okay. So what just popped into my head is that I know a group of people who've been playing Dungeons and Dragons together every week for 30 years, literally 30 years. And they are really close to each other, even when, they don't do it in the same room, they're online, and have been for a really long time, since they could be. So maybe part of it is that there's some conversation that we need to be having as a movement with a movement of people in that age group. This is what we want. What is it that would pull you away from your computer and out of your home and to make a priority of being someplace with people?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer. I can't answer that for them, and none of us can, probably.
No, and I think one thing, yes, bring them out of their rooms, but there's also in all of this is to recognize that from here on out, we're probably looking at hybrid models anyway, that there's always going to be an online component. So if you can't bring them out of the room, maybe bring them into an online environment as the beginning place where there can be a sharing. Can we create a sacred online space where you can come together and talk about what's on your mind from a spiritual perspective, where you have somebody who's maybe trained in leading the group, but is also, youngish to the degree that we can find those in our movement, and bring them together and build that sense now that we've got this trust online. And maybe all we could get out of certain people, but at a certain point, maybe they want to connect. Maybe there's always an encouragement to take the online into an offline environment and develop it greater. And it's the same way with spiritual practices. We can do spiritual deepening stuff in an online environment, but eventually we want to bring people into a group. So I think everything that we're talking about, whether it's classes or whether it's spiritual processes where we're meditating together and doing other spiritual practices to develop our sense of a connection to the divine. We can do all, or it's even our social action, or it's our developing community. All of these can be both hybrid with groups that are online and groups that are offline, and
They can be. And, one of the aspects of the ministry that I've been creating now is something I'm calling spiritual homes, and supporting ministers and ministerial students, particularly in creating home groups,
mhm.
which are, about shared experience. And I have somebody that I, you know, brainstormed around this with, who's been doing it once a month right now. There's a thing going on at their house that's experiential. One time it's drumming, next it's solstice. And within minutes, there were 20, 25 people coming to their home once a month.
Right.
And that's been going on for several months now. And that's the size of many of our small communities.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's some call to this experience, conversation, deepening together, and getting out of our heads these experiences which have us integrating our body and our mind and our heart and our shared humanity. So I know we probably need to talk a little bit about the New Thought Media Network right now.
Yeah. You can see me moving with my hand on the mouth.
moving towards the camera, right? But I do want to talk about this idea some more, because
I do too.
it lends to this conversation about the future of ministry itself.
Yeah,
So,
and the future of group leadership is where I thought you were going with this, because that really
is what I'm calling ministry. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we hope that you're enjoying this heated conversation. Heated being we're all excited, and and that you want to keep programming like this coming. So we want to show you a little message that hopefully you will lead you into supporting the New Thought Media Network. Here we go.
We hope you're enjoying Conversations in Mind. This program is made possible by the New Thought Media Network, a nonprofit that's supporting conscious, spiritual media. If you'd like to support this work, just scan the QR code to make a donation. It lets the network know you like this show and helps them to continue bringing you this type of content. You can also go to ntmedia.org and click on Donate. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Now, back to the show.
And if you're watching this on a recording, you can always stop and back up to get to that QR code. We also remind you that we enjoy your likes, your comments, your suggestions, your questions, your topics for future conversations you'd like to see us get into, and we'll remind you of that again at the end. But be sure to support this network of which we are a part.
So let me, if you would indulge me, let me start this part of our conversation. I told you before we started that I had been pulled back to this poem that's in the opening of the Science of Mind textbook, of all places, and it's called "Peace Be Unto Thee, Stranger." And I know many of us who have been in the movement have heard it, but Holmes wrote this: "Peace be unto thee, stranger. Enter and be not afraid. I have left the gate open, and thou art welcome to my home. There is room in my house for all. I have swept the hearth and lighted the fire. The room is warm and cheerful, and you will find comfort and rest within. The table is laid, and the fruits of life are spread before you. The wine is here also, it sparkles in the light. I have set a chair for you where the sunbeams dance through the shade. Sit and rest and refresh your soul. Eat of the fruit and drink of the wine. All is yours, and you are welcome." Now, I've always loved this. Like it calls to me frequently, right? And I see this as both an invitation to the inner work and the inner table, as well as to the table of divine, and then to a table we share with one another. And I think that in all of our building and structuring and creating systems and buildings and all of these things, that sometimes we've forgotten this.
Mhm.
the underlying all of this is a desire in people for community.
Yeah.
And to learn something and to grow something, right? So this idea of spiritual homes is not a new idea by any means. It's forever, this is what people have been doing forever and ever, amen. But kind of bringing it to a new place. And in that, however, I've had this long time question, and I want to say that there is a big part of me that probably is going to sound old fashioned right now. I really value the education that I received through Holmes Institute and through getting a master's degree from Holmes Institute. I really value the structure of our organization. Yes, there are many changes that need to happen, but I value that we have a structure. And I value very much that we have ethics that we live by. We talked about this a little bit, that we have this shared values and shared ethics and shared way that we are going to treat people. And I don't, when I look at teachers online and people who just instantly call themselves a guru, there's a lot of just add water gurus these days, right? And it's true. It is true. And the fact of how much education we require to get to this idea of ministry, I have always had a lot of value on. And I really question in the near future whether or not people can seriously call that a thing they can make a career out of in a way that supports them financially, in having any reasonable kind of standard of living in the United States. Now, I think that has actually been true for a very, very, very long time, but we don't talk about it. Our ministers have been mostly underpaid for a very long time. And we have I feel like this is a whole other show too. We have a big shame button about how we teach prosperity, but we don't always manifest it.
Mm-hmm.
But all that aside, it does lend to this thing of how do we prepare people to lead groups that are maybe not so money focused, maybe really more of a home group kind of thing, and still teach people in a way and be able to adhere to a set of values and ethics and those kinds of things, and make it so that it's not something people depend on for their livelihood. And this might get some comments out in the world, who knows, because I'm sure that this is going to push some buttons for some people. And I'm sorry, I know that a lot of us in ministry have questioned this in our time in ministry, like how can I continue to do this at the kind of pay that I'm able to receive through it. And the model of asking people for the money to support has just never really worked. We took a beautiful teaching that Ernest Holmes did on Wednesday nights in halls, and we planted it on top of a Christian church service model, and it's never quite fit, so I think we're due for big change, actually,
Right.
in how it all works.
Yeah, I would agree. I think many of us feel we are in the midst of a change.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of Science of Mind. And I know that as a part of the celebrations, there's also some notes going around or some discussion being put out regarding a look at a conversation around where do we go from beyond the 100 years? What is this organization and our role in the philosophy of bringing it out to the world look like as we move over this major milestone in our history? And I think it's the perfect time to look at that, because I agree with you that if there's a minority of centers that I think are able to manage a full-time support salary for ministers of our communities. And beyond that is a question regarding the funding mechanism that we have for our communities and looking at that. So I think as we're looking at how do we position ourselves into the future and what a spiritual community looks like, we have to look like, and how does it become viable financially has to be part of that conversation as well. I don't have the answer to that one. I do want to address one thing that may be semi-related, and that's the fact that I think that our role of the minister as the font of all needs to be reevaluated as well.
Yes.
I'm like you in the sense that I so value the degree and the training that I got from Holmes Institute. I so value the organizational commitment of putting a container around and a degree of requirements and minimum standards and all of that stuff that comes with an organization. I love that exists. However, I also hearken back to the time that John Waterhouse and I were in a conversation one day about, the amount of time it takes to become a practitioner and then be a minister, then to start a center after that. And how do we grow this movement with this long path to becoming a leader in our movement? And one of the things that we came up with at that time, this is, 15, 20 years ago, was the Spiritual Living Circles program, which I'm so happy to see that it's thriving. But that was birthed out of a conversation that John and I had, and I was given the charge to sort of put that in place. And the idea was, can we seed communities and groups where we have somebody who's the head of the group who's not necessarily gone through all these years of training, but have a support mechanism behind them to provide the materials and guidance, et cetera, et cetera. And I think to a degree that's worked successfully. There's a vulnerability in that. I recognize, in that, there's the person who's maybe leading the group hasn't had the degree of training, et cetera, et cetera. But that said, I also see that as we look at these communities going forward and the models that we're talking about, is that perhaps the role of the minister as the lead and overseer of everything that goes on in that spiritual organization needs to be reviewed. It needs to be considered at the local level. And going back to that sort of, if I were running a local community now, what would I do? I would think the minister's role is really to develop a cadre of volunteer ministers, and by ministers, I'm losing that, and non-licensed kind of standpoint. But yeah, sort of like, a fundamentalist Christian has their deacons and all of those things, that we have these people who are built and trained and being in leadership roles in our communities who lead a particular area. And they lead that area so that, we are addressing, what are we doing regarding social activism in our committee, in our organization, in our community? What are we doing to feed our sense of community with people so people feel that ongoing development? What do we do in terms of developing the spiritual growth of understanding of our philosophy, which I think may need to be the minister's role, and how are we also doing spiritual practices and deepening our awareness of oneness? And I would add into the mix the psychological and healthy growth of our overall community so that we are supporting them in the humanistic aspects of not only their feeling the need for community, but everybody comes to the table with a shadow side to them. And there has to be an aspect of our communities that gets into addressing, the shadows of not only the leaders, but the members in the community. But the key point I'm trying to make here is that the role of the minister, instead of being the one who has to do everything, is somebody who is coordinating the leaders of that community to ensure that they all see what their roles and responsibilities are for furthering that aspect of the community, that outcome of the community, the particular goals of what the community is attempting to accomplish in that. And to the degree that you can parse it up and develop a trusted group so I see shared leadership. That's a long-winded way of saying it, is that we have to move from a top-down to a shared leadership model in all of our communities. Now, I know we've given that lip service in the past, but I'm not always sure that it's really been developed totally in our communities.
Well, we don't teach it. We don't teach people how to lead that way. We don't teach people how to develop other leaders. I mean, we're barely teaching them to lead, and so part of where I was going was like, as much as I value the education that we received, it's changed and it doesn't fit I don't think it fits anymore in many ways. And it does not fit this changing paradigm. And the model of church is not fitting the changing paradigm. And again, so I had this experience while I was working while we still owned the office building in Genesee, that one day when I was just stressed out of my mind about whatever, which was so infrequent, right? Um, I went down to the chapel and I picked up a copy of the Chronicles of Science of Mind, which is a book, if you're not familiar with it, is a book of all the meeting minutes of forever ago. And I was like, okay, just do that thing, right? Ruffle the pages and show me something that inspires me to get through this day. And I open it up, and it's meeting minutes from sometime in the early 60s. And they're talking about how the churches are not giving enough to sustain the organization. And what are we going to do about this whole tithing thing? And I was like, oh my God, we've been doing this same conversation at the local level and at the home office level for since day one, really. Like, and so what's interesting is that what I from very outside observing feel like at this point though is that what we're doing is we're adding to the requirements and we're making it harder in many ways to do a thing called ministry. And the thing that's really had growth over the last several years that I'm aware of has been the circles, but we have not been, as far as I know, doing a lot to develop that program or to expand that program. And that's where this home groups thing comes in, because that's what the circles are, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
supplied materials by home office. The ones that I'm trying to work on creating are people that have been through some ministerial training or at least practitioner training, because I do believe that there has to be a set of standards and values in some of these things, or we're in kind of a danger zone
Right.
in terms of behavior. And we've seen recently what happens with spiritual power and the abuse of it, right? So I don't really, not a fan of the just add water guru.
Yeah.
So
What I'm hearing in our conversation, Barb, is that there's also a change that needs to be done. Not only structurally with New Thought and specifically Centers for Spiritual Living, looking at a new model of community, but a new model of the leadership, a new model of the funding, and a new model of the training of our ministers so that they have the skills to work in the new kind of community, to recognize that we're moving away from a standalone church building where people come in for a Sunday service and nighttime classes to a new hybrid model that maybe doesn't even have a building and rents a room or has some shared space, and we haven't really gotten into it today, but the partnerships with other spiritual communities, that maybe there is a role for us to build more of our communities that are renting space or renting space to or from other like-minded spiritual groups, that we come together and then share resources. If we're going to do any of the things that we've been talking about, whether it's social activism or spiritual practices, why not do them in partnership with like-minded groups, but then also build the sense of community within our own group. And that takes a different kind of leader than what we've been training. And it takes a different kind of model for how that group can pay its bills, because there are expenses that come in any kind of spiritual group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm hoping that that no one from home office is listening to this and losing their mind right now.
I hope they are.
We're not, I want to be clear. Like, this is not like criticizing everything you're doing. Here we are in this model that we've all worked to develop, and the world is changing faster than we have been able to change. And I think we all know that. At the heart of it, there are people working their fannies off every single day to support what's going on out there in Centers for Spiritual Living. And I want to acknowledge that our home office staff is incredibly dedicated and doing everything, running as fast as they can.
Yeah.
But at some point, it's going to become incumbent upon more of us to help to make these changes. And there are pockets of this. Like, I do know in Santa Cruz, there's a younger minister, and they're doing all kinds of things across spiritual faith traditions, and they were sharing their building with them, and then they had a building problem. But so it's happening in small pockets, and hopefully that grows. But I also, back to the future of spiritual community, I would say that, like, you had 3 4 very like, I would say that to me, the future of spiritual community is being with people who help you explore the depths of your own connection to spirit, but who also are there to support you when it's terrible, and because life is sometimes terrible, and who are there to celebrate with you when life is amazing, because sometimes life is amazing, and that who come together to really be that way with each other and for each other.
Barb, that sounds like a good wrap up from you. You know, I want to share one quick thing. My wife and I have been watching this Apple TV series called Shrinking.
Oh my God, right?
And
It made me cry 3 weeks in a row this fall.
But one of the things that what we've talked about in watching this is that there is sort of why does this attract us? And it's because I think we all see the community that is built by the people on the show. The characters on the show become very close and support one another. And because at the heart of the show is some psychiatrist or psychologist who are supporting people from a therapist kind of way, the whole show tends to be about a community that is supporting one another and uplifting each other to be the best person that they can be. And when I see the shared love, there's a part of Mary and I that when we watch that show, we say, I want to be a part of that community. That's what I want. And we know there's areas of our life where we have parts of it, but we look at that, and I don't mean to hold that up as a perfect model.
No, but have you noticed that, oh my God, I can't think of his name. He was in Star Wars.
Harrison Ford.
Harrison Ford, his character sounds like one of our ministers.
Yes, the whole
very frequently.
Yes.
And every time I watch it, I'm like, we are not unique anymore. We're really not. We are everywhere. So our uniqueness, to me, will come from being able to develop community and connection with other people. Yeah. Because what we teach is old news. It's everywhere. It is literally everywhere, even in Harrison Ford on a weekly show on some channel.
So I bring that up simply because you can look at that there are the people who are the therapists who are sort of the quote unquote gurus, leaders, but even they have their foibles and need assistance from everybody else. And so it's building community. It's supporting one another. It's recognizing each other have needs, each other have strengths, and trying to build on that. And I think there's ideas from that, if we look at that can be overlaid under what our spiritual communities are. If we take that same kind of interconnection and support of one another and helping to see what other people needed and providing that's needed, I think is a beautiful model for.
Well, I wish you and Mary would just move closer down this way. But I'm going to have to look at that. I have been so focused on how much science of mind is in that show that I hadn't even thought about the community aspect of it. And it's true, but part of it that's true is that they also accept each other's BS, and they accept each other's mistakes, and they hold each other accountable. They really hold each other accountable, actually, but in ways that are kind and
love is at the heart of everything.
Calling forth the best in people, not beating them up for their mistakes, but calling forth something better from them.
Yeah. So there's ideas I think we can take from that and look at the creation of that spiritual community in the future, that we are really about bringing each other to wholeness in a group setting. And I think something in us knows that we need to not only give our gifts, but to receive the gifts from each other.
Yes.
Well,
wow. Another hour went flying by.
Well, we thank everybody for watching today. Again, we would encourage you if you enjoy this, to be sure to like it, share it with your friends. Also, to leave us a comment and suggestions for future topics.
And drop a little donation on that QR code, because not only does it support the New Thought Media Network, it lets them know that you are doing so through listening to this program, and then we'll know that you like it.
Thank you, everybody. Till next time.
Have a great week.